Detroit, November 2025. Snow drifted through pre-dawn darkness like ash from a fire no one remembered starting. Daniel Morrison's alarm dragged him from dreams of Elizabeth. The sound violence against silence, digital scream shattering the only peace he knew anymore. His hand found the clock and killed it. 5:30 a.m. Same as every morning for 3 years. He lay still for 30 seconds, staring at ceiling tiles the color of old teeth. $400 square feet, $800 a month. Every surface in this place told the same story. You used to be someone, now you're this. The kitchenette had 2 working burners. The bathroom shower coughed rust-colored water for the first 30 seconds. On the shelf above the sink, Elizabeth smiled at him from their wedding photo, 28 years frozen in a silver frame. She'd worn her grandmother's dress altered 3 times because they couldn't afford new. He'd rented a tuxedo that didn't fit his shoulders. "Promise me you'll find your way back," she'd whispered in the hospice hand, thin as a paper, voice reduced to breath. He'd carried that promise for 3 years like a stone in his chest. Daniel sat up slowly, 55-year-old knees protesting, vertebrae crackling like distant gunfire. The laptop on the card table showed his bank balance in blue numbers that might as well have been a countdown clock, $347.82. He made instant coffee in the microwave, watching the chipped mug spin behind scratched glass. The cup had once said "World's Best Mechanic" before the dishwasher wore the letters away. Now it just said W. Blank, blank. Nick, a description that felt increasingly accurate. His phone vibrated against the Formica counter. The screen lit up with words that made his chest tighten. "Dad, can you help this week? Tuition's due and I'm short. Sophie, 26 years old, working night shifts at Pittsburgh General while finishing her nursing degree." Elizabeth's determination wrapped in his stubbornness. She tried so hard not to ask for help, which meant when she did, she really needed it. Daniel looked at the laptop screen again. Did the math that had become second nature, rent due in 12 days? Bus pass renewal next week. Electric bill sitting on the counter with the red past due stamp. He transferred $200 before he could reconsider. Balance, $147.82. The checking account notification glowed on his phone for 3 seconds, then disappeared, just like everything else he'd once had. He poured the scalding coffee, burning his tongue on the first sip because he never learned to wait. In the corner, barely visible in the dim light, sat the red metal toolbox that had belonged to his father. James Morrison had carried that box to Ford every day for 35 years. Daniel didn't open it anymore. Couldn't. Every tool inside was a memory of Sunday afternoons in the garage, learning to listen to engines that spoke in frequencies most people never heard. "An engine has a heart, son. You listen with your ears, your mind, and your soul." James had died in 1993 or so. Daniel had believed for 32 years. Heart attack, instant, painless. That's what everyone told him when they called him home from community college, 23 years old, and certain the world had ended. He wouldn't learn until much later that this was only partially true. Across town, Catherine Sterling stood in her penthouse, watching Detroit wake up beneath her. The city sprawled in sodium vapor orange and LED white, a circuit board of ambition and failure. 50 floors up, insulated by glass and money. She could almost forget she'd come from down there. The apartment was minimalist perfection chrome and black leather. Every surface chosen by an interior designer whose fee could have fed a family for 6 months. On the kitchen island, a Slayer espresso machine. $8,000 of Seattle engineering hissed steam through $30 blue bottle beans from Oakland. Catherine reviewed quarterly reports on her tablet, red pen marks bleeding across projected revenue. Her hand trembled slightly as she highlighted another paragraph, then stilled, forcing discipline into rebellious muscles. Weakness was permission for the world to take everything. Her father had been weak once, for one fatal moment, and it killed him. She would not repeat his mistake. The reports glowed with their own kind of dread. Patriot Marine Engine Project. 47 consecutive failures. Thermal shutdown at 11 minutes. 47 seconds in every test cycle. Richard Maxwell threatening withdrawal of $60 million investment. 47 tests. 8 weeks. Millions of dollars. Every engineer on staff had taken their shot at the problem. Brandon Cooper with his Harvard MBA. Emily Crawford fresh from MIT. The entire team throwing credentials at a machine that didn't care about pedigree, and still failure at exactly 11 minutes and 47 seconds every single time. Ma'am, breakfast is ready. Marcus Bennett emerged from the kitchen alcove. 68 years old, retired Marine with 20 years of service etched into his bearing. Slight Kentucky draw softened by decades in Detroit. He'd worked for Catherine 15 years, long enough to know she'd skip every meal if he didn't bring them anyway. He set a tray beside her elbow. Poached eggs, whole grain toast, fresh fruit arranged like still life, hands clasped behind his back, waiting. Catherine circled another failure report and read, "I'm not hungry. You haven't eaten since yesterday morning, ma'am. I'm occupied." Marcus retreated with the tray concern etched in the lines around his eyes. He'd served in Vietnam, seen men break under pressure, recognized the signs in Catherine's rigid shoulders, the way her hand shook before she forced it still. Catherine's phone buzzed. Caller ID Richard Maxwell. She stared at the name. $60 million, 2% of his net worth, but he treated every dollar like it was his last. Texas oil money, built on Nevada rare earth minerals. A man who'd started with nothing and remembered what nothing felt like. The phone stopped buzzing, then immediately started again. If she didn't answer, he'd pull funding now. If she answered without a solution, same result. The board meeting was Wednesday, 3 days away. She needed an answer before then. Catherine's reflection stared back from the window. Platinum hair, sharp features, 52 years of control. That was one phone call away from shattering. She answered, "Richard, his Texas draw came through warm but waited, Catherine. If test 48 fails, my money walks, board meeting Wednesday. Fix it or I'm out." The line went dead before she could respond. Catherine sat down the phone with hands that wanted to shake. Forced them. Still stared at the reports that all said the same thing. We don't know what's wrong, but somewhere in this building, someone had to know. Someone always knew. The bus to Sterling Engine Works took 42 minutes through morning traffic. Daniel stood near the back door, holding the overhead rail, watching Detroit slide past fogged windows. November cold turned the glass into abstract Art Frost fractals and condensation trails that blurred the city into impressionism. Empty storefronts, churches converted to community centers, houses with plywood windows and dreams that died in 2008. He'd grown up 3 blocks from here, back when the auto plants ran 3 shifts, and you could smell prosperity in the exhaust fumes. Summer 1983. Daniel's father working on a neighbor's Plymouth in their driveway. Sunday afternoon. Heat thick enough to chew. James's hands moving with absolute certainty. No wasted motion. Each action purposeful and precise. An engine has a heart, son. You listen with your ears, your mind, and your soul. Young Daniel had placed his palm against the Plymouth's engine block, feeling heat and vibration. "I can hear it, Dad. It's struggling like it hurts." James had smiled, pride lighting his weathered face. "That's right. Now I'll teach you how to heal it." The bus passed the corner where Morrison's Auto Repair used to stand. Now it was a Dollar General bright yellow sign advertising deals on everything Daniel couldn't afford. 15 years he'd run that shop. Built it from nothing after working other people's garages for a decade. Customers who came back because he listened to their cars the way his father taught him. Then Elizabeth got sick. Stage 4, the kind of cancer that laughed at insurance coverage limits. $580,000 in medical debt. The garage couldn't carry it. The house couldn't carry it. Everything went to the hospitals, and still it wasn't enough. She died anyway, and Daniel kept existing because Sophie needed him to, because Elizabeth made him promise. The bus stopped at Sterling's employee entrance. Daniel swiped his ID badge at security, a young guard who'd been checking him in for 3 years without ever learning his name. The service elevator smelled like industrial cleaner and defeat. 40th floor. The maintenance cart waited in the supply closet bucket already filled with chemical-sharp cleaning solution, mop heads freshly laundered. 8:30 a.m. Same routine every day. Executive offices first, then conference rooms, bathrooms, break areas, working his way down through the building floor by floor until his shift ended at 5 p.m. Most days, Daniel was invisible. That was the deal he'd made with himself when medical bills devoured everything. Be invisible. Keep your head down. Cash the check. Don't make waves. Invisibility was survival in a world that had already taken everything it could from him. But today, invisibility would crack. The maintenance cart rolled smooth across marble that cost more per square foot than Daniel earned in a week. He moved through Sterling's executive floor like a ghost present, but unseen, necessary but unacknowledged. At 8:45 a.m., he pushed his cart past the workshop on the 40th floor. His hands kept moving swish of mop across already clean floor, but his attention shifted toward the glass walls. Behind the glass sat Sterling's prototype marine engine on its test stand, 7 feet long and 4 feet tall. The Patriot PM4000, $4 million of American engineering designed to power next-generation cargo vessels through Pacific routes. The workshop was empty this early. Engineers not due until 9:30, but the engine waited in standby mode. Sensors blinked in amber. Cooling fans whispered. Somewhere deep in its mechanical heart, fuel waited in pressurized lines for ignition that wouldn't come for another hour. Daniel stopped, set down his mop, pressed his palm against the glass. He closed his eyes, slowed his breathing, let the building's ambient noise, HVAC systems, distant conversations, the hum of fluorescent lights fade into background static. And then he heard it. Not with his ears alone, with the part of himself James had trained over 15 years of Sunday afternoons. The part that knew engines spoke in frequencies most people dismissed as mechanical noise. The Patriot standby systems created a symphony. Fuel pumps maintaining pressure servos, adjusting valve positions, electronic controls cycling through diagnostic routines. Beneath it all, buried in the harmonics, Daniel found what he was looking for. A hesitation, a stutter, so subtle it was almost subliminal. Fuel rail number 3. Every 3.2, in 2 seconds, a pressure fluctuation that shouldn't exist. Daniel's lips moved soundlessly, counting 1 to 1002, 1003, 1000. There, the pressure spike, barely perceptible but consistent. He opened his eyes and pulled a worn notebook from his uniform pocket, pages filled with 2 weeks of observations recorded in cramped handwriting. Flipped to the current page, wrote, Test 47, fuel rail. 3 pressure fluctuation every 3.2 seconds. Bar to PSI conversion error, 0.08%. Compounds across 47 subsystems by 1147. Thermal cascade. Daniel had been watching this engine die for 2 weeks, standing outside the workshop every night after his shift ended, timing the failures with his father's old watch, a Timex with a cracked crystal that still kept perfect time. Every test followed the same choreography. 0 minutes, ignition smooth, start 2:30, all systems nominal. 5 minutes, temperature climbing normally 8:15. First stress indicators appear. 11 minutes, thermal readings approaching critical 11:47. Emergency shutdown every single time. The engineers saw random malfunction. Daniel heard the engine screaming in a language no one else understood. Detroit Power Systems in Dearborn built the Patriot's fuel system calibrated in bar pressure for precision engineering, but the GE controller from Schenectady read PSI because that's what GE's legacy systems used. Two American companies, different measurement standards meeting in one engine. The conversion created a 0.08% error, microscopic, negligible, in any single component. But the Patriot had 47 interconnected subsystems, each one compounding that tiny error-like interest on a debt no one knew they owed. By 11 minutes and 47 seconds, the accumulated discrepancy triggered safety protocols designed to prevent catastrophic failure. The engine wasn't broken. It was being killed by the very systems meant to protect it. Above Daniel, a security camera swiveled slightly. The lens focused. Red recording light blinked steady. Someone was watching him watch the engine. Daniel felt the weight of observation, but didn't look up. He closed his notebook, returned it to his pocket, picked up his mop, went back to being invisible. But the camera kept recording. And somewhere in this building, someone was reviewing footage of a janitor who stood outside a classified workshop for 2 weeks, eyes closed, lips moving like prayer. Catherine sat behind her desk reviewing failure reports when her assistant knocked. Rachel Kim, 28, hired 6 months ago, still believed hard work and loyalty meant something in corporate America. Ma'am Security flagged unusual behavior. The maintenance worker. Catherine didn't look up from her tablet. What maintenance worker? Night custodial staff. He's been observing the Patriot workshop every night for 2 weeks. That got Catherine's attention. She set down the tablet. Show me. Rachel pulled up video on the wall-mounted display. Black and white security footage, timestamp in the corner. 2-3-4-700 hours. The screen showed a man in sterling coveralls standing outside the workshop. Not working, not cleaning, just standing. Eyes closed, lips moving slightly. Posture suggesting deep concentration rather than casual observation. Scroll back, Catherine said. How many nights Rachel toggled through footage? Different dates, same behavior. Same man, same position, same timestamp. 23:47, 14 nights, 2 weeks of identical behavior. Who is he? Rachel consulted her tablet. Daniel Morrison, maintenance staff, 3 years with Sterling. Background check shows bankruptcy, 2022 medical debt, former small business owner, no criminal record, lives in Dearborn. Catherine zoomed the footage until Daniel's face filled the screen, studied his expression in the harsh fluorescent light of the empty corridor. This wasn't the face of corporate espionage, no furtiveness, no guilty glances at cameras. This was the face of someone solving a puzzle. Catherine's mind raced through possibilities. He's stealing trade secrets, but for whom and why stand in front of cameras doing it? He's mentally unstable. Possible. But the behavior is too consistent, too purposeful. He knows something. Catherine looked at the Patriot through her office window. $4 million sitting idle because no one, not Brandon Cooper with his Harvard MBA, not Emily Crawford, fresh from MIT, not the entire engineering staff could explain why it failed at exactly 11:47. But a janitor was spending his nights watching it fail, timing it, understanding it. Bring him up here, Catherine said. Now Rachel hesitated. Ma'am, he's maintenance. Shouldn't we go through his supervisor first? Protocol? I don't care about protocol. Get him up here in the next 5 minutes or find a new job. Rachel fled. Alone in her office, Catherine made a calculation she'd been avoiding. If the Patriot failed Test 48 tomorrow, Richard Maxwell would pull his $60 million. The board would demand her resignation at Wednesday's meeting. Sterling would collapse under the weight of falsified reports she'd been filing for 4 years. Her father had faced ruin once, chose suicide over shame. Catherine had sworn she'd never be that weak. never be that cornered. But here she was, 3 days from board meeting, 47 consecutive failures, and a janitor who might know something everyone else missed. It wasn't desperation that made her summon Daniel Morrison. It was desperation's smarter sister calculated risk. If he failed, she lost nothing. He was already nothing in her hierarchy. If he succeeded, she bought time, maybe survival. And if he tried to embarrass her, she had contingencies. She always had contingencies. Catherine pulled up Daniel's personnel file, studied his background. Morrison's Auto Repair, 2007 to 2022. Bankruptcy filing $580,000. Spouse deceased, 2022. One dependent, Sophie Morrison, 26. Nursing student, Pennsylvania. She committed that name to memory. Sophie Morrison. Leverage if needed. Catherine checked her reflection in the window. Platinum hair, perfect. Makeup flawless. Black suit tailored to project authority. Every detail in place. The mask was ready. Now she just needed to see if a janitor could do what her expensive engineers couldn't. Glass table, reflecting fluorescent lights. 15 engineers with laptops and defensive expressions. 8 weeks of failure documented in charts that all said the same thing. We don't know why. Brandon Cooper sat at Catherine's right hand, 42 years old, Harvard MBA, framed on his office wall arrogance, wrapped in tailored suit. He'd been lead engineer on the Patriot for 6 months. Each failure carved a little deeper into his professional pride. Emily Crawford occupied a seat at the far end of the table. 25 MIT diploma, still fresh blonde hair, pulled back in professional ponytail. Daughter of an Indianapolis physics teacher who'd taught her to respect knowledge wherever it came from. She watched the door with curiosity rather than Brandon's defensive hostility. Security escorted Daniel in at 9:32 a.m. He stopped just inside the doorway, aware that every eye in the room was evaluating him and finding him wanting. Blue coveralls with Sterling Engine Works embroidered over the heart, name tag reading D. Morrison Maintenance. 55-year-old face weathered by decades of work, hands scarred from wrenches and screwdrivers, posture that said, "I don't belong here," without speaking a word. Catherine let the silence stretch. Power move. Make him uncomfortable. Establish hierarchy. Your name, Daniel Morrison. Ma'am, what's your position here, Mr. Morrison? Maintenance staff, ma'am. Catherine activated the wall display. Security footage played Daniel outside the workshop. 14 nights in sequence, all at 23:47. Then why have you been standing outside our workshop every night like some kind of stalker? Do you realize I could terminate you for corporate espionage? The engineers shifted. This was entertainment now. A janitor about to be destroyed. Something to break up the monotony of failure. Daniel met Catherine's eyes without flinching. I wasn't spying, ma'am. I was listening. Brandon Cooper laughed, sound like breaking glass sharp and dismissive. Listening to what a $4 million marine engine talking to you. Daniel turned his attention to Brandon. The room temperature seemed to drop 5 degrees. Yes, sir. And it's saying you're killing it. Silence. Every laptop stopped clicking. Every breath held. The kind of silence that precedes explosion or revelation, no one yet knew which. Catherine's expression shifted from anger to something more dangerous. Interest. Explain. Daniel's voice remained level, conversational. The tone of someone explaining basic mathematics to a child who'd been using calculus wrong. Your fuel system was built by Detroit Power Systems in Dearborn, calibrated in bar pressure for precision engineering. But your GE controller from Schenectady reads PSI because that's what GE's legacy systems used. He paused. Let them process. 2 American companies, different measurement standards, same result. Each conversion creates 0.08% error. Small, but across 47 subsystems it compounds. By 11 minutes and 47 seconds, thermal cascade triggers emergency shutdown. Brandon's face flushed red. That's nonsense. Diagnostics show no conversion errors. Daniel's response was gentle, which made it cut deeper. Because your diagnostics used the same flawed standard. Mr. Cooper, you're measuring the problem with the tool that created it. Emily Crawford rose from her seat at the far end, hands trembling slightly as she addressed Daniel across the gulf of education and credibility that separated them. Mr. Morrison, where did you study? The question hung in air like smoke. Daniel's answer was simple. My father's garage, Detroit. I don't have a degree, Miss Crawford. Catherine looked at Daniel's hands, scarred knuckles, calluses from decades of work, fingernails, permanently stained despite scrubbing. Then she looked at her own hands, manicured weekly at salon, where they served champagne with pedicures, pale and smooth, except for the tremor she couldn't quite control. Two people from different worlds, both carrying weight no one else could see. Her phone buzzed on the conference table. Caller ID, Richard Maxwell. She didn't answer. The phone stopped buzzing, then immediately started again. Catherine made her decision. It felt like jumping off cliff and hoping someone built a bridge on the way down. Fine. Brandon, contact everyone. Board members, engineers Maxwell and his delegation. Tell them to be here at 2 p.m. today. Brandon leaned forward, voice sharp with challenge. Catherine, that's not nearly enough time. Catherine turned to Daniel, and in that moment, her carefully constructed mask slipped enough for everyone in the room to see the desperation underneath. You'll fix that engine in front of everyone. 2 hours after they arrive, Daniel's voice stayed quiet. Ma'am, I'm not authorized to work on equipment. Catherine moved closer, stood directly in front of Daniel. Close enough he could smell her perfume, expensive and cold like everything else about her. Her voice dropped to whisper that the conference room microphone barely caught 2 hours Morrison. Succeed. I'll give you a new life, shop supervisor, $120,000 a year, health insurance, retirement, everything you lost. She paused. Let him taste the possibility. But if you fail, and we both know you're going to fail, I will destroy you. Not just fire you, destroy you. I'll make sure you never work with engines again. Not here, not in Detroit, not anywhere in this country. Your name will be toxic. Your daughter Sophie in Pittsburgh with her student loans and her nursing career. I'll make one phone call. Every hospital in Pennsylvania will know her father is a fraud. You will have nothing. You will be nothing. Daniel looked into Catherine's eyes and saw not cruelty, but terror. A woman drowning who'd grabbed onto him as a life raft without caring if she pulled him under too. He thought about Elizabeth in the hospice bed, hand thin as paper, voice reduced to whisper. Promise me you'll find your way back. He'd carried that promise for 3 years like a stone in his chest. Start the clock, ma'am. Catherine blinked, thrown by the quiet certainty in his response. She'd expected begging or excuses. Maybe anger, not acceptance, not challenge. The maintenance closet measured 8 feet by 10 feet, industrial shelving stacked with cleaning supplies, spare parts for floor buffers, boxes of light bulbs, and paper towels. Daniel had spent 3 years storing invisibility in this room. But in the back corner, hidden behind a case of toilet paper, sat something that mattered more than anything Sterling Engine Works had ever manufactured. Daniel pulled out the metal toolbox and set it on the concrete floor, sat cross-legged beside it like a monk before an altar, ran his hands across scratched red paint and rust spots that refused to surrender despite decades of Michigan weather. James Morrison had carried this box to Ford every day for 35 years. Through 3 recessions, 2 plant closures, union strikes, and corporate restructurings that treated human beings like budget line items. The handle was worn smooth by his father's grip. The latches still clicked with the same metallic certainty they had in 1960. Daniel opened it with reverence reserved for sacred things, Socket wrenches in graduated sizes, needle-nose pliers with red rubber grips, wire strippers that still cut clean after 50 years, screwdrivers with wooden handles darkened by hand oil and time, the patina of work that could never be replicated by anything new. These tools had fixed thousands of engines, had fed a family through economic collapse, had taught a son that competence was its own kind of wealth. Summer 1983. Daniel, 13 years old, watching his father work on that Plymouth. Detroit heat cicadas screaming in the elm trees. James's hands moving with absolute certainty, no wasted motion. Each action purposeful and precise, like watching a master pianist. An engine has a heart, son. You listen with your ears, your mind, and your soul. Young Daniel placing his palm against the engine block, metal warm from running, vibrating with internal combustion explosions happening 30 times per second. Controlled violence converted into motion. I can hear it. Dad, it's struggling like it hurts. James smiling. And in that moment, Daniel seeing something he'd spend his whole life chasing, his father's pride. That's right, son. Now I'll teach you how to heal it. Daniel pulled out the notebook he'd been keeping for 2 weeks, flipped through pages of observations, sketches, calculations. The math wasn't elegant. His community college courses had been interrupted by James's death, by starting work, by building a life that didn't leave room for finishing formal education. But the conclusions were sound. He'd checked them 17 different ways. The Patriot PM4000 was dying from a problem so simple that expensive engineers missed it because they were looking for something complicated. 3 days ago, Daniel had ordered a Johnson Controls JC-PN7 ML544 adapter using his own credit card. $58 for the part, $20 shipping, $78 he absolutely could not afford. But something in him needed to prove this was solvable. Needed to prove James's teachings still mattered in a world that valued credentials over competence. The adapter had arrived yesterday, sat in his locker, now wrapped in bubble wrap, waiting. Unremarkable piece of brushed aluminum the size of a hockey puck, designed to bridge the gap between measurement standards invented by engineers who never imagined their systems would need to talk to each other. A $78 part to fix a $4 million problem. If he was right. If he was wrong, Catherine would destroy Sophie's future to prove a point about power. Beneath the standard tools wrapped in an old shop rag lay something Daniel rarely touched, James's personal notebooks from his final years at Ford. He unwrapped them carefully, pages yellowed and brittle, filled with his father's handwriting, technical notes, sketches, observations about engines that didn't exist yet. Hybrid concepts, 1987. Variable valve timing, 1990. Direct injection optimization, 1992. Ideas ahead of their time. Solutions to problems Detroit wouldn't face for another decade. All of it ignored by Ford management because James Morrison didn't have an engineering degree, just 35 years of experience that meant nothing to people with credentials. Daniel closed the notebooks and returned them to the toolbox, pressed his palm against the lid one more time. I'll make you proud today, Dad. The world will finally hear what you tried to tell them. He stood slowly, knees protesting, back tight from 3 years of mopping floors. Picked up the toolbox. 4 hours until showtime. Time to prove that listening mattered more than degrees. Catherine's assistant spent 4 hours on the phone calling in favors accumulated over 6 months of 80-hour weeks. She leaned on relationships, made promises she wasn't sure Catherine would honor, used the magic words, emergency board matter, and Richard Maxwell will be in attendance. By 1:00 p.m., she'd assembled the impossible 200 people on 4 hours' notice. Sterling's main assembly hall occupied half of the 35th floor, 15,000 square feet, normally used for product launches and investor presentations. Today it became theater arena courtroom, rows of chairs facing the workshop window, 40 feet of glass separating audience from performance space. Press cameras in the back. Catherine had personally approved media presence. Live stream equipment being tested by IT staff. YouTube. LinkedIn. Facebook. Live. Catherine's decision. And if this is triumph, the world watches us succeed. If it's humiliation, at least we control the footage. Either way, Sterling Engine Works would be on record. Robert Richard Maxwell walked through the assembly hall doors at 1:45 p.m. like he owned the building, which if this demo failed, he essentially would after bankruptcy proceedings. 68 years old, 6.2 of West Texas oil money turned rare earth billions. His suit probably cost more than Daniel's car, but Maxwell wore it like work clothes. The Texas draw had been worn smooth by decades of boardrooms, but you could still hear guano in certain words. He'd started with nothing, high school diploma and a job on oil rigs. Built his first company in 1982 with $5,000 borrowed from a credit union. Now he sat on 17 corporate boards with $8 billion in net worth, and he treated every dollar like it was still that first $5,000. Maxwell settled into the front row without greeting Catherine, pale blue eyes fixed on the workshop window, where the Patriot PM4000 waited on its test stand. 2 male aides and 1 female analyst flanked him. Tablets open. Recording everything, Dr. Rebecca Harrison arrived at 1:52 p.m. because she'd spent 30 years learning that being late to anything was permission for people to ignore you. 58 years old, former Boeing senior engineer turned independent consultant, industry legend for 2 reasons: the Alaska Airlines crash that destroyed her career in 1995 and the 28 years of meticulous work she'd done since to earn back trust. Richard Maxwell had hired her 6 months ago to evaluate Sterling's technical capabilities. Her preliminary report, 30 pages of analysis, sat in Maxwell's briefcase right now. Bottom line, Sterling has serious management issues but potentially salvageable technology. Rebecca took a seat beside Maxwell and pulled out her tablet, opened a document titled Patriot PM4000 Failure Analysis Preliminary Conclusions. She'd reviewed 8 weeks of test data, consulted with former colleagues in marine propulsion, reached the same dead end as Sterling's engineering team. The failures appeared random, but random failures didn't repeat with mechanical precision. Something was wrong with their diagnostic approach. Rebecca just hadn't figured out what until today. Maybe. She pulled up live video feeds from the workshop's 6 cameras, studied the Patriot sitting silent on its test stand. $4 million waiting to prove itself or die trying. 7 board members arrived in a cluster at 1:55 p.m., executives who collectively owned 43% of Sterling's stock. Enough voting power to remove Catherine if they achieved consensus. They took seats in middle rows, whispering among themselves, glancing at Catherine with expressions ranging from concern to predatory interest. George Patterson led the pack, 68, silver-haired, looking like Central Casting's idea of corporate America. He'd been pushing for Catherine's removal for 6 months. This demo would either shut him up or give him the ammunition he needed. Brandon Cooper arrived with 28 engineers in tow at 1:58 p.m., everyone who'd worked on the Patriot in some capacity. Their jobs depended on making it work. Watching a janitor attempt what they couldn't was either salvation or insult. The room would decide which. Emily Crawford took a seat near Brandon, but not beside him. Pulled out her tablet and opened the Patriot's technical specifications, started cross-referencing fuel system documentation. Something nagging at the back of her mind about Daniel's conversion error theory. 200 people in person live stream already showing 11,000 viewers online. Word had spread through engineering forums and LinkedIn. Anonymous accounts in the chat speculating this is either going to be legendary or the most embarrassing thing ever. Anyone know who the maintenance guy is? $100 says he doesn't last 20 minutes. I'm rooting for him, but this seems insane. Catherine Sterling walked to the podium at exactly 2:00 p.m., not 1:59, not 2:01. Precision was power. She wore a Ralph Lauren purple label suit, $8,000 of American tailoring in navy wool. Hair and makeup perfect, every detail calculated to project authority and control. But her hands gripped the podium edge hard enough to whiten her knuckles, and anyone watching closely could see the tremor she couldn't suppress. Small earthquake running through the foundation of her composure. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on short notice. Her voice carried to the back row years of board presentations teaching her how to project without shouting. Pause. Let the crowd settle into uncomfortable silence. We have an unusual situation. Another pause. Catherine had learned that silence made people lean forward. Pay attention. This is Daniel Morrison. For 3 years, he's been our maintenance staff. This morning, he claimed he could repair the engine our team hasn't solved in 8 weeks. Murmurs rippled through the audience like wind through wheat. I'm giving him 2 hours to prove it. Rebecca Harrison leaned forward, studying Daniel with intensity of someone evaluating an unexpected variable. The maintenance uniform, the weathered face, the posture that suggested hard-won competence rather than academic training. She'd met men like this before at Boeing in her years consulting for manufacturers across the country, the kind who learned engineering through hands and intuition rather than textbooks. Usually they worked in obscurity. Sometimes they were brilliant. If Mr. Morrison succeeds, he becomes shop supervisor at $120,000 per year. Someone in the back row whistled soft sound, quickly shushed. If he fails, he's terminated immediately, and Sterling Engine Works will need to explain to our investors why we've wasted 8 weeks and millions of dollars on a project that couldn't be fixed. Richard Maxwell rose from his front row seat without warning. His Texas drawl cut through the room like wire through butter, plain, but weighted with 40 years of billion-dollar decisions. Excuse me, Mrs. Sterling. Catherine's face went pale. Interruption wasn't part of the script. If this man fails, my $60 million also moves forward to a company that knows what it's doing. The threat was explicit. Absolute. No negotiation. Catherine's face went through 3 expressions in 2 seconds. Pale shock-flushed anger, then rigid control. Yes, Mr. Maxwell, I understand completely. She gestured toward the workshop entrance, hand steady, despite the terror in her eyes. Mr. Morrison, you have 2 hours starting now. Daniel walked to the workshop entrance under 200 pairs of eyes, all weighing him, measuring him, finding him inadequate before he touched a single tool. The security guard at the door checked his temporary access badge laminated card that said Workshop Access. Temporary in red letters that felt like a warning label. Guard stepped aside. Daniel entered. Climate-controlled space, sealed by glass walls on 3 sides, turned the workshop into an aquarium where Daniel was the specimen on display. 6 HD cameras mounted in corners capturing every angle for the live stream. Main feed focused on his face. Secondary feed showing his hands the engine diagnostic screens. The live stream chat scrolled past on tablets in the audience. Here we go. This is either genius or the saddest thing I've ever seen. Why is my heart pounding for a stranger? Please let him succeed. The Patriot PM4000 dominated the center of the room, 7 feet long, 4 feet tall. Masterpiece of American engineering wrapped in cooling systems and sensor arrays. $4 million of machinery that had failed 47 consecutive tests. Daniel approached it slowly, boots clicking on epoxy-coated floor. Each step recorded by 6 cameras for immediate broadcast to 11,000 strangers. He stopped beside the engine, placed both hands on the block. Around him, 200 people in the assembly hall fell absolutely silent. The kind of quiet that precedes revolution or revelation, no one yet knowing which. The live stream chat exploded. What is he doing? Is he praying? No. Wait, he's listening. This is insane. I can't look away. Eyes closed, breathing slowed, the world reduced to metal under his palms and the frequency of mechanical systems running in standby mode. He listened, not with his ears alone, with the part of himself James had trained over 15 years of Sunday afternoons in a garage that smelled like motor oil and possibility. The engine systems hummed their complex symphony pump servos, electronic controls. Buried beneath the surface noise, he found what he'd been hearing for 2 weeks. 4424. The pressure fluctuation in fuel rail 3, the stutter in injection timing, the mathematical error that no one else could hear because they were measuring it with tools calibrated to the same flawed standard. Rebecca Harrison pulled out her phone, opened the live stream on her screen, started reading comments. Someone had posted technical specifications for Detroit Power Systems fuel architecture. Someone else linked to GE's controller documentation. A third commenter, claiming to be a marine engineer in San Diego, wrote, "If there's a metric imperial conversion issue, he's right to check adapter protocols, but that's too simple." Sterling would have caught that. Rebecca's mind sparked. Too simple. That was the problem. Everyone had been looking for complexity because complicated problems required complicated solutions. But engines didn't care about complexity. They just wanted to be understood. Daniel opened his eyes. "Start the engine." Brandon Cooper, watching from the assembly hall, pulled out his tablet, activated the Patriot's remote start sequence. The engine roared to life, pistons firing in sequence, fuel pumps engaging, cooling systems spinning up. The sound was glorious, powerful, exactly what a $4 million engine should sound like. Daniel kept his hands on the block, feeling vibrations travel through metal into bone. There, 2400 RPM, pressure spike in fuel rail, 3 every 2 seconds. Brandon checked his tablet, pulling up real-time diagnostics. The readings show normal operation. Daniel's eyes stayed closed, voice calm, certain. "Your readings are wrong, Mr. Cooper. The engine speaks truth. Machines lie." Rebecca Harrison stood abruptly, startling Maxwell beside her. She walked to the glass wall, pressing close enough her breath fogged the surface. When she spoke, her voice carried through the microphone system with crystalline clarity. "How long until thermal cascade?" Daniel looked directly at her, recognized something in her intensity, reminded him of his father, of people who understood that engineering was listening, not talking. 11 minutes, 47 seconds. Like the previous 47 tests, Rebecca nodded slowly. "Do you have a solution?" Daniel pulled his worn notebook from his pocket, flipped to a page covered in pencil sketches and calculations. "I need a Johnson Controls JC-PN7 ML5444 adapter metric to Imperial Bridge. $58 at Granger Industrial Supply, made in Milwaukee, Wisconsin." Someone in the back row laughed, harsh, disbelieving sound that echoed through the assembly hall. "A $58 part fixes a $4 million problem. This is absurd." Daniel turned to face the man, quiet voice carrying to every corner of the silent room. "Sometimes the best solutions are the simplest ones, sir. We overcomplicate things because we think complicated problems need complicated answers. But the engine doesn't care about complexity. It just wants to be understood." Camera zoomed on Catherine's face in the assembly hall, terror and desperate hope fighting for dominance. Daniel walked to the parts cabinet, opened it, retrieved the adapter he'd ordered 3 days ago using his credit card he couldn't afford to use. $78 total with shipping. The cost of proving James Morrison's teachings still mattered. Unwrapped it from bubble wrap, held it up to one of the 6 cameras brushed aluminum size of a hockey puck. Unremarkable except for what it represented. American engineering. Bridging American engineering. 2 measurement standards meeting in one piece of metal. The solution hiding in plain sight. He set the adapter on the workbench, pulled James's toolbox close, opened it with reverence, and began the work that would either save his life or destroy it. 6 cameras captured Daniel's hands as he worked. Main feed showed fingers moving with practiced efficiency. Socket wrench removing the existing connection assembly from fuel rail 3. Inspecting threads for damage. Finding them clean. Secondary feeds displayed diagnostic screens updating in real-time crowd reactions in the assembly hall. Catherine's face cycling through stages of hope and dread. The live stream had grown to 14,000 viewers. Chat scrolling too fast to read engineers from around the world, debating, speculating, rooting for or against the janitor who claimed he could do what credentials couldn't. Daniel knelt beside fuel rail 3, tracing the line from the Detroit Power Systems fuel pump to the GE controller junction, found the connection point where bar-calibrated pressure met PSI reading sensors. The Johnson Controls adapter was designed for exactly this marriage of incompatible standards. Brushed aluminum body, precision-machined threads, internal calibration that would convert pressure readings through 7 decimal places instead of 6. 0.08% error eliminated. Brandon Cooper provided diagnostic tools from the assembly hall grudgingly via remote access. You'll need the GE Diagnostic Suite. Access code is on the tablet I'm sending in. A junior engineer brought the tablet, set it beside Daniel without making eye contact, retreated quickly. James's socket wrench fit Daniel's hand like prayer fits desperation. 15 minutes to install the adapter with precise torque, 45 Newton meters, exactly per Johnson control specification. Behind the glass, Emily Crawford watched her tablet. System logs updating as Daniel's modifications rippled through the Patriot's architecture, each parameter shifting into new configuration. She pulled up Detroit Power Systems fuel specification sheet, found Appendix D pressure calibration standards, bar to PSI conversion, 14.5038 PSI per bar, rounded to 14.50 for processing efficiency. Her breath caught, rounded to 14.50. 50. The error was right there, documented in the spec sheet they'd all read during initial design review 8 weeks ago. 0.0038 rounded away. 0.08% error across the conversion. Emily turned to Brandon, who was pretending not to watch her screen. He's right. The conversion error is in Appendix D. We never caught it because we assumed Detroit Power and GE would account for cross-platform compatibility. Brandon's jaw tightened, didn't argue. 8 weeks of failure had taught him when pride cost more than admission. With the adapter installed, Daniel accessed the GE controller's firmware, navigated menus most engineers spent months learning. His fingers moved with certainty. Muscle memory from 15 years running Morrison's auto repair, updating engine control units for customers who trusted him with their vehicles. Adjusted fuel injection timing, recalibrated pressure sensors, remapped the fuel delivery curve to account for the adapter's 7 decimal place precision. Each change logged automatically. System status updating on every engineer's screen in the assembly hall. They watched a janitor rewrite firmware they'd spent weeks analyzing. The live stream chat lit up. He's adjusting the injection map in real time. That's not standard procedure, but it makes sense. Is anyone else holding their breath? This is the most stressful thing I've ever watched. In the assembly hall, skepticism began cracking. Someone in the third row leaned forward. He knows what he's doing. George Patterson, board member who'd been pushing for Catherine's removal, crossed his arms tighter. This wasn't supposed to work. A janitor wasn't supposed to solve what Harvard and MIT couldn't. But the diagnostic screens told truth. Machines couldn't lie about system parameters stabilizing into optimal ranges. Daniel made the final adjustments while the engine ran. Like surgeon operating on beating heart, technically possible but requiring absolute precision. Pressure valves adjusted in micro increments. Thermal sensors recalibrated. Safety protocols updated to reflect new baseline. Rebecca Harrison stood at the Glass Now tablet in hand, following every modification. She'd spent 30 years in aerospace engineering, recognized mastery when she saw it, regardless of where it came from. He's not guessing. Every adjustment is purposeful. He understands the system architecture. Maxwell's blue eyes tracked Daniel through the glass. Where did a maintenance worker learn advanced fuel injection mapping? Rebecca smiled slightly. Same place my best engineers at Boeing learned, by actually touching the machinery instead of just modeling it. Daniel stepped back from the engine at 3:40 p.m., wiped his hands on the rag from James's toolbox fabric stained beyond redemption by decades of oil and solvent. But he'd never throw it away. Some things mattered more than appearance. Ready for testing. The engine had been running the entire 90 minutes. Daniel had worked on it live. No shutdown, no safety margin. If he'd been wrong about anything, the Patriot would have cascaded into thermal failure while he was elbow deep in its fuel system. But it hadn't. Wall clock in the assembly hall read 3:47 p.m., 1 hour and 47 minutes since Daniel entered the workshop. 200 people sat in absolute silence. 14,000 viewers worldwide held breath. The only sound was the Patriot's steady, idle mechanical heartbeat waiting to prove itself, or die. Daniel stood beside the engine, one hand resting on the block, feeling the rhythm. Combustion, pressure, heat converted to rotational energy. Everything humans had learned about controlling explosions for useful work. 4 minutes, whispers starting in the back rows. 5 minutes, someone shifted in their seat, sound loud and quiet. 8 minutes, tension-building engineers checking their tablets. 10 minutes, 3:58 p.m. People leaning forward. 11 minutes, 3:59 p.m. The moment approaching. Catherine gripped the armrests of her chair, knuckles white, breathing shallow. Every muscle in her body wound tight enough to snap. Richard Maxwell leaned forward, expressionless, blue eyes calculating the cost of failure. Rebecca Harrison held her tablet in both hands. Temperature graphs climbing toward the threshold that had triggered 47 consecutive shutdowns. 11 minutes, 30 seconds. Emily Crawford checked her screen. Temperature nominal, pressure stable. Brandon Cooper stared at his diagnostics like they were magic trick. He couldn't explain. All parameters showing optimal, no stress indicators, no thermal cascade beginning. 11 minutes, 40 seconds. Someone in the back row gasped. Another person stood halfway up, then sat down again quickly. The live stream chat went insane. It's going to make it. Oh my God, I can't believe this. Come on, come on, come on. 11 minutes, 47 seconds. The moment every previous test had ended, emergency shutdown, thermal cascade, failure logged, engineers staring at data that made no sense. But not today. Today, the Patriot PM4000 ran smooth and steady at 2400 RPM, temperature optimal, pressure perfect, no errors logged anywhere in 47 subsystems. Emily Crawford gasped. Hand flew to her mouth. Brandon Cooper stared at his diagnostic screen finger, stabbing at the refresh button like it might change the impossible into something logical. Rebecca Harrison smiled, small expression that transformed her face. Recognition of something rare. Competence meeting crisis. And winning. 12 minutes. Someone in the back row started clapping. Tentative at first, unsure. 13 minutes. The applause spread like fire through dry grass. 14 minutes. People stood one by one, then in clusters, then the entire assembly hall on their feet. 15 minutes. The room erupted in cheers. 200 people acknowledging something they didn't entirely understand, but couldn't deny. George Patterson stood slowly, last to rise, his face carved from stone. Clapped once, twice, then sat down again. This wasn't victory to him. This was complication. 16 minutes. Catherine remained seated, tears streaming down her perfectly made-up face, mask shattered by relief and humiliation, and something that might have been gratitude. 17 minutes. Richard Maxwell was first to approach the glass. Texas draw, carrying through the microphone system. Mr. Morrison, you have saved my investment. I am grateful. He began to clap, slow, deliberate. The sound cut through celebrating, crowd-like conductor calling orchestra to attention. Others joined him, synchronized applause. 200 people acknowledging the impossible made real. Daniel didn't celebrate. Remained beside the engine hand, resting on warm metal, feeling the heartbeat that had finally found its rhythm. Through the glass, he saw Catherine standing alone near the podium. Every eye had been on him. No one noticed the CEO crying. Their eyes met across 40 feet of glass and immeasurable distance of class and circumstance. Two people from different worlds, both changed by the past 2 hours in ways neither could yet articulate. Dr. Rebecca Harrison was first to the glass wall, drew Richard Maxwell's attention by her movement. She pressed her hand against the surface, watching Daniel through transparent barrier. When she spoke, her voice carried through the microphone system with crystalline clarity. Authority earned through 30 years of engineering, lost and rebuilt. Where did you study, Mr. Morrison? Daniel met her eyes, saw something familiar there. Reminded him of James of Sunday afternoons learning to listen to engines speaking in frequencies most people dismissed as noise. My father's garage, Detroit. I don't have a degree, ma'am, Rebecca nodded slowly. Gesture of recognition and respect that crossed the glass divide. Your solution was elegant. Occam's razor, the simplest explanation is usually correct. She paused. Let the assembly hall hear her verdict. Most engineers wouldn't have seen it because they were looking for something complicated. You solved it because you listened instead of assumed. Richard Maxwell stood, walked to the glass beside Rebecca, 6'2" of Texas oil money, studying Daniel with intensity of someone who'd built an empire by recognizing talent others overlooked. His draw made the words sound plain, but they carried weight of 40 years making billion-dollar decisions. Mr. Morrison, you have saved my investment. I am grateful. He began to clap slow, deliberate. The sound cut through the still celebrating crowd like conductor bringing orchestra back to attention. Catherine Sterling approached the glass slowly. Every eye in the room followed her movement. The applause faded into silence again. Audience waiting to see how the CEO would handle this moment of complete vulnerability in front of investors, employees, 14,000 strangers watching online. You saved my company. Daniel's voice was gentle. Without triumph, without mockery, I fixed an engine, ma'am. Saving the company is your job. Catherine extended her hand, palm pressed against the glass barrier between them. Daniel matched the gesture from his side. Two hands separated by transparent inches, symbols of different worlds touching without touching. CEO and janitor, power and invisibility meeting in moment of acknowledgement. Thank you, Mr. Morrison. 6 cameras recorded the image from 6 angles. Main feed showed the moment in perfect composition. Catherine's hand on one side, Daniel's on the other. Glass between them reflecting light. One of them crying. Both of them changed. The live stream chat exploded. I'm not crying. You're crying. This is the most beautiful thing I've ever seen. Save this image. Someone make this a poster. Within an hour, the image would be shared 10,000 times. By midnight, 30,000 Catherine Sterling and Daniel Morrison, hands meeting through glass. The photograph that would define Sterling Engine Works' redemption or collapse, depending on what happened next. Security escorted Daniel out of the workshop. The crowd parted like sea. Pats on back, handshakes. Congratulations. Engineers who dismissed him 2 hours ago now wanted to touch him. Daniel nodded, smiled, but didn't linger. He needed to get home, process what just happened. Call Sophie and tell her she didn't need to worry about tuition anymore because he'd done it against every odd, against credentials and hierarchy and the weight of invisibility. He'd proven James Morrison's teaching still mattered. As Daniel disappeared into the service elevator, His phone buzzed with text message. Unknown number. He'd check it later. Right now, he just wanted to breathe. Daniel sat on his bed at 7:30 p.m., still in his uniform, too tired to change. The adrenaline had burned off during the bus ride home, leaving behind exhaustion that felt like gravity increased tenfold. His phone showed 17 missed calls, 12 from numbers he didn't recognize, probably journalists, 3 from Sophie, 2 from Sterling's HR department. He called Sophie first. "Dad." Her voice carried joy and disbelief. "I saw the video. It's everywhere. You're trending on LinkedIn." Daniel smiled despite exhaustion. "I fixed an engine, sweetheart. That's all. That's not all. And you know it. Dad, you're a hero. There's articles being written. People are calling you the genius janitor and blue-collar Batman and Sophie." Daniel's voice gentle but firm. "It's late. You have shift tomorrow. Get some sleep." "Okay, but Dad, I'm proud of you. Mom would be so proud." Daniel's throat tightened. "Thank you, kiddo. I love you. Love you too." He lay back on the bed, stared at the ceiling. Elizabeth smiled at him from the nightstand photo 28 years ago, believing love and hard work were enough to build a life that couldn't be taken away. "I did it," he whispered to her image. "I found my way back, just like I promised." Outside his window, snow fell harder now, Detroit winter settling in. The city looked almost clean under fresh powder-white blanket, hiding scars underneath. Daniel's eyes drifted closed. Tomorrow he'd figure out what shop supervisor at 120,000 meant. Tonight he just needed to rest. 11:47 p.m. The phone rang. The sound shattered sleep like glass breaking. Daniel jolted awake, disoriented, phone screen glowing in the dark. "Unknown number," he answered anyway. "Hello?" Catherine Sterling's voice came through cold and precise. The vulnerability from earlier completely erased, replaced by something harder, more dangerous. "Don't celebrate yet, Morrison." Daniel sat up, turned on the bedside lamp. Outside his window, snow fell harder, accumulating on the sill, muffling the world. "What do you mean?" Catherine's voice carried the precision of a scalpel. "I've done my research. Morrison bankruptcy filing 2022. Morrison's auto repair. $580,000 in medical debt. Your wife Elizabeth cancer." Daniel's hand tightened on the phone. "That's none of your business. Everything about the man who humiliated me is my business. I didn't humiliate you. I fixed an engine." Catherine continued like he hadn't spoken. She'd spent the past 7 hours having her people dig through Daniel's life, finding every crack, every wound. "I also found customer complaints, safety violations. A lawsuit settled out of court in 2008. Daniel's voice went hard. The lawsuit was fraudulent. Customer claimed I installed faulty brakes, but state inspection proved the failure was from wear, not workmanship. We settled because fighting it would have cost more than paying. I don't care what it was, Morrison. I care what it looks like." She paused. "Let that sink in. Disgraced mechanic tricks investors. Janitor with history of safety violations gets promoted. I can see the headlines already." For the first time since Elizabeth died, Daniel felt genuine fury, not grief, not exhaustion, pure rage at someone trying to take from him again when he had so little left to lose. "What do you want?" Catherine's voice dropped to whisper quieter, therefore more menacing than any shout could be. "Resign tomorrow morning. Write a letter saying you got lucky. Return to maintenance. Do that, I'll let you keep your janitor job. $800 a week. Invisibility. Same as before. And if I refuse, then I don't just fire you, Morrison. I destroy you." Her voice carried absolute certainty. This wasn't bluff. This was promise. Dead wife, failed business, settled lawsuit. I'll make sure every news outlet knows your complete history. Every interview request I'll provide, context they won't fact-check your reputation. What little you built today will be ash by Friday. She paused, loaded the final bullet. And your daughter, Sophie Morrison, 26 years old, nursing student at Pittsburgh General, $40,000 in student loans, night shift in pediatrics. Daniel's blood turned to ice. How would her future employers react if they knew her father was a fraud? One phone call, Morrison, one conversation with the right person, and her career is dead before it starts. Hospital networks talk. Medical board reviews applications carefully. Questions about character, about family, about whether someone can be trusted with vulnerable patients if their own father can't be trusted with engines. She'll spend the rest of her life wondering why she can't get hired, never knowing it was because of you. Daniel couldn't speak, couldn't breathe. The phone pressed against his ear felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. All he could see was Sophie, 6 years old, helping him in the garage while Elizabeth made dinner. 16, getting her first job to help with bills. 26, working night shifts to pay for school because she wanted to help people the way nurses had helped Elizabeth in those final weeks. Everything he'd done surviving 3 years of invisibility fixing that engine, keeping Elizabeth's promise, all of it was to give Sophie a chance at a life better than his. And Catherine Sterling had just threatened to take that away. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely controlled rage. "Don't you dare mention my daughter." For a moment, the mask slipped. Daniel heard something else in her voice. Not cruelty, pain, maybe, or recognition of herself in his fury. "What kind of person are you?" Catherine's response came after a heartbeat. "The kind who survives Morrison. You don't understand. You never will." The line went dead. Daniel sat in the lamplight, phone still pressed to his ear, listening to silence. On his nightstand, Elizabeth smiled at him from their wedding photo 28 years ago, when they'd believed love and hard work were enough. "Promise me you'll find your way back." He'd thought he kept that promise today. Now Catherine Sterling was threatening to push him off the cliff before he could take the second step. His phone buzzed. Different number. Text message from unknown sender, Mr. Morrison. "This is Dr. Rebecca Harrison. We need to talk tonight about Catherine Sterling." Daniel stared at the message, then at Elizabeth's photo, then out the window at snow falling on Detroit. He texted back, "Where and when? Response immediate. My hotel." Now, Renaissance Center room 40-12. Daniel stood, put on his jacket, snow melting off the fabric as apartment heat hit it. He looked once more at Elizabeth's photo. "I don't know what's happening, but I'm not running anymore." Left the apartment. Midnight bus routes ran slow through Detroit winter. Daniel stood near the back door, same position as every morning commute. But tonight, the city looked different. Street lights haloed by falling snow, empty roads, occasional car passing headlights cutting through white curtains like searchlights. He'd ridden this bus for 3 years to Sterling, back home. Same route, same stops, invisible among night shift workers and people whose lives happened in margins of daylight. But tonight, he wasn't invisible anymore, and that terrified him more than obscurity. Ever had the Renaissance Center rose 40 floors above the Detroit River, glass and steel catching city lights monument to ambition that survived the city's collapse and resurrection. Daniel arrived at 12:25 a.m., lobby heated security barely glancing at him before waving toward elevators. Room 40-12, Rebecca had texted. 40th floor, same level as Sterling's workshop. Symbolic somehow, like the universe insisting certain altitudes mattered for transformation. Elevator opened onto plush carpet, sconces casting warm light doors numbered in brass plates that probably cost more than Daniel's monthly rent. He found 4012 northwest corner, knocked once, door opened on first knock. Dr. Rebecca Harrison stood there, 58 years old, still dressed despite the hour, gray hair pulled back, reading glasses on chain around her neck, face that had seen Boeing boardrooms and federal investigations and 30 years rebuilding trust. She stepped aside without greeting, gestured Daniel into suite that cost more per night than his monthly rent. "Coffee, please." Northwest corner view, floor-to-ceiling windows showing Belle Isle across the Detroit River. The island's old lighthouse rotating its beacon through darkness, sweeping across water that separated Michigan from itself. Rebecca moved to French press on the desk, poured 2 cups with efficiency of someone who'd spent decades in labs and workshops where coffee was fuel rather than pleasure. Handed Daniel a mug, ceramic, warm against his cold hands, settled into chair by window. Daniel took the sofa, sank into cushions that probably cost more than his car. Tell me about Catherine's call. Not did she call or what happened. She knew. Somehow she'd known Catherine would strike tonight. Daniel told Rebecca everything. Catherine's threats, the weaponized research, the promise to destroy Sophie's nursing career, the demand for resignation. Rebecca listened without interrupting, fingers steepled under her chin, processing information the way engineers process data systematically, looking for patterns and failure points. When Daniel finished, Rebecca sat down her coffee cup, stood, walked to the window with her back to him, silhouette against the city lights. She's panicking. Daniel's voice hard. She threatened my daughter. Rebecca turned from the window. In the dim light, Daniel saw pain that time hadn't erased. No, she's showing you where you're vulnerable. It's tactical, not personal. Catherine doesn't attack strength, she attacks love. That's how terrified people operate. How do you know so much about her? Rebecca returned to her chair, picked up her coffee, took a long sip like she needed fortification for what came next. Because 30 years ago, I was her. 1995, I was 28, Boeing's youngest senior engineer. I climbed over anyone who got in my way. No friends, no family, just work and ambition. She paused, memory crossing her face like shadow. Then there was an accident. Daniel leaned forward, something in her tone making his chest tight. Alaska Airlines Flight 261, January 2000. Stabilizer jack crew failure. 88 people died because I missed a detail during final review. Daniel remembered the crash investigation lawsuits that lasted years. The news said it was maintenance failure. Rebecca nodded. That's what Boeing's lawyers argued successfully. But I knew, the engineering team knew. We'd signed off on a design with a critical flaw, buried it in paperwork because admitting it would have cost billions. I was fired quietly, blacklisted from aerospace, lost everything I'd built. For 2 years, I couldn't find work anywhere in the industry. Then what happened? Rebecca pulled a photograph from her tablet case, edges worn from handling, handed it to Daniel. The image showed younger version of Rebecca standing beside a man in a garage, both covered in grease, both smiling. Timestamp June 1995. Daniel's breath caught. The man was James Morrison. His father, a Ford engineer in Detroit, heard about me, reached out, offered to teach me to rebuild engines in his garage. She looked at Daniel directly, said I still had value, even if I'd made mistakes. Said failure doesn't define people, how they respond to it does. Daniel held the photograph carefully, stared at his father's face, frozen in moment of generosity James had never mentioned. Wait. I always believed Dad died in 1993, heart attack in his garage. Rebecca shook her head gently. He had a heart attack in 1993, nearly died. Paramedics revived him. He spent 2 months in cardiac rehab. She paused. Then he went back to Ford for another 2 years. He finally passed in 1995. I was there for the funeral. Daniel's world tilted sideways. Every memory he'd built around his father's death was off by 2 years. Timeline he'd carried for 32 years had a hole in it, shaped like information no one shared. Why didn't anyone tell me? Rebecca's voice was careful, navigating family history that wasn't hers to judge. Your father asked them not to. He didn't want you leaving college to take care of him. Made the family promise they'd tell you it was sudden, painless, that he didn't suffer. James wanted you to have your own life, not sacrifice it for his illness. Silence filled the hotel room, heating systems cycling on. Distant traffic, 40 floors below. Daniel looked at the photograph again. His father alive, 2 years longer than he'd known, teaching someone else the skills Daniel had learned in childhood. Passing on knowledge like relay race, where the torch never went out. He was protecting me even when it cost him my presence at the end. That's the kind of man your father was. Rebecca stood, walked to her briefcase, pulled out another folder, this one physical paper, not digital. The weight of documentation that couldn't be deleted or hacked. James left these with me before he died, asked me to give them to you when you were ready. She handed Daniel a stack of engineering notebooks. 12 volumes bound in black canvas. James Morrison's name printed on each spine in silver marker. Daniel opened the first one, his father's handwriting. Technical sketches. Solutions to problems that wouldn't exist for another decade. Hybrid engine concepts, 1987. Variable valve timing, 1990. Direct injection optimization, 1992. James had been inventing the future in a garage while Ford executives ignored him because he lacked credentials. The last notebook contained a letter on the final page dated June 10, 1995, 2 weeks before James died. Daniel read it aloud, voice breaking. Daniel, if you're reading this, I'm gone, and Rebecca has decided you're ready. I'm sorry I wasn't there longer, but I'm leaving you something more valuable than money or property. The ability to hear what others can't. The world doesn't recognize people like us. No degrees, no fancy schools, but engines don't care about that. They speak truth to anyone who listens. Listen, son, fix what's broken, including people. Make me proud. Love, Dad. Daniel's eyes blurred with tears held back for 32 years. Grief for the father who died protecting him. Pride for the legacy that shaped him without his knowing. Rebecca waited in respectful silence, understanding that some moments required space rather than comfort. Why am I telling you this now? Daniel wiped his eyes. I don't know. Rebecca opened her tablet, pulled up file folder that expanded into dozens of documents. Financial records, news articles, police reports, psychiatric evaluations. Because you need to understand Catherine Sterling. She's not evil. Daniel, she's broken, and broken people hurt others to protect themselves from being hurt again. Rebecca swiped through documents while she spoke. Catherine Sterling, born 1973, Detroit. Father was William Sterling, founded Sterling Manufacturing in 1965, built it into a $50 million company over 25 years. Then, in 1989, his business partners embezzled $4 million, framed him for it. William faced 15 years in federal prison. Rebecca pulled up a newspaper clipping, headline screaming across the top. Sterling Manufacturing CEO found dead. Apparent suicide. Photo beneath William Sterling in better days. Standing in front of his factory arm around a teenage girl who looked like younger version of Catherine. Same platinum hair, same sharp features, same eyes that suggested she'd already learned the world was cruel. Catherine was 16. She found him in his office. He'd hanged himself from the sprinkler pipe. Left a note saying he couldn't face prison. Couldn't watch his family lose everything because of his weakness. Rebecca swiped to bankruptcy filing. Catherine's mother lost the house, cars, savings, everything seized to pay debts and legal fees. Catherine dropped out of high school, worked 3 jobs to support her mother and younger brother, 16 years old. Night shifts at diner, weekend shifts at factory, morning shifts at dry cleaner. 10 years later, she'd saved enough to start Sterling Engine Works in her father's name. Built it from nothing into a $400 million company over another 15 years. Daniel studied the documents. Timeline of survival built on terror of becoming her father. Success story. Survival story. There's a difference. Rebecca brought up another document marked confidential board eyes only. Financial statements from Sterling's internal audits showing discrepancies between reported performance and actual results. Catherine's been falsifying reports for 4 years, hiding failures, inflating successes, booking future revenue as current income, rushing safety certifications despite unresolved concerns. She scrolled through page after page of evidence. Total fraud exposure approximately $180 million across 14 major contracts. Daniel processed this puzzle pieces clicking into place. She's terrified of losing the company, of becoming her father. Exactly. William Sterling was weak once, trusted the wrong people, and it killed him. Catherine swore she'd never be vulnerable like that. Never trust anyone, never show weakness. But fear-based control isn't leadership. It's a prison that eventually collapses. So, what do we do? Rebecca closed the tablet, met his eyes with directness of someone who'd spent a career making difficult decisions. We offer her a choice, she laid it out. Cooperate fully, confess to board, resign as CEO, testify against anyone complicit. In exchange, no criminal prosecution. She steps down, assists investigation. Sterling survives under new leadership. Why would she accept? Daniel asked. She threatened to destroy me tonight. Because right now she's operating from panic. Tomorrow morning, when she's had time to think, she'll realize she has 2 paths. Rebecca counted them on her fingers. Path 1, continue fraud. Eventually go to prison like her father almost did. Path 2, confess. Get second chance he never had. Catherine is not stupid. She's scared. I don't think she'll choose prison. But if she does, we give evidence to federal prosecutors. She makes that choice anyway, just without benefit of cooperation. Daniel looked down at the stack of James's notebooks in his hands. 12 volumes. His father's life's work. Solutions to problems Ford wouldn't face for a decade. All of it ignored because James Morrison didn't have the right credentials. Why are you helping me? You don't owe me anything. Rebecca smiled, sad expression that transformed her face. I owe your father everything. He taught me that redemption is possible if someone's brave enough to offer it. Now it's my turn to pass that forward. What time are we meeting Catherine? 8 a.m. Her office. I'll text her at 6 o'clock to arrange it. She won't refuse because she'll want to control the location. Rebecca paused. And if she brings lawyers, we'll know she's chosen the hard path. But I don't think she will. Catherine is smart enough to recognize when she's out of options. Daniel stood. It was 2:45 a.m. He'd been awake for 21 hours. Body exhausted, mind racing. He gathered James's notebooks, held them against his chest like armor. Thank you for keeping these safe. Rebecca walked him to the door. Your father trusted me with his life's work. I'm glad to finally complete that trust. At the threshold, Daniel paused, looked back at Rebecca, silhouetted against the window. Detroit, sleeping beneath her. Do you really think she'll choose redemption? Rebecca's answer came after a heartbeat. I think she's tired of being afraid. I think she's been waiting 36 years for someone to offer her the choice her father never got. Pause. Tomorrow morning, we find out if I'm right. Daniel rode the elevator down 40 floors, walked out into Detroit winter snow, still falling, muffling the world. The city looked almost peaceful under white blanket. He clutched James's notebooks tighter. Inside them, his father's voice speaking across decades. Listen, son. Fix what's broken, including people. Make me proud. Tomorrow at 8 a.m., he'd walk into Catherine Sterling's office with evidence of fraud and an offer of redemption. Either she'd accept and they'd all have a second chance, or she'd fight and they'd all burn. Daniel looked up at Sterling Engine Works 10 blocks away, 40 floors tall, lit windows like scattered stars. Somewhere in that building, Catherine Sterling was awake too, making her own calculations, deciding whether to be her father or become someone he would have been proud of. The snow fell harder. Daniel turned toward the bus stop. In 6 hours, everything would change again. Catherine hadn't slept either. She'd spent the night pacing her penthouse 50 floors above Detroit, windows showing the city waking under fresh snow, everything clean and white and temporary. By noon, the plows would turn it gray, 6 a.m. Her phone buzzed. "Catherine, we need to meet 8 a.m. your office. Regarding Sterling's future, Dr. Rebecca Harrison. Not regarding the Patriot engine, not regarding Daniel Morrison. Sterling's future." Rebecca knew something. Catherine stood at the window evaluating. Option 1. Ignore the text. Impossible. Rebecca worked for Richard Maxwell. Ignoring her was ignoring the investor who held Sterling's survival in his hands. Option 2. Bring lawyers. But that admitted guilt showed weakness. Revealed she knew she'd done something wrong. Option 3. Face Rebecca alone. The only real choice. "Ma'am, you haven't slept." Marcus stood in the doorway of her bedroom. Retired Marine. 20 years of service teaching him to recognize when someone was breaking under pressure. "I'm fine, Marcus. You're not, but you're going to that meeting anyway." It wasn't a question. Catherine turned from the window, looked at Marcus, 68 years old, worked for her 15 years, one of 3 people in the world who'd seen her cry. "If I don't come back from that meeting, call my lawyer. Tell him to start damage control." Marcus's expression didn't change. "You'll come back, ma'am. You always do." But his voice carried doubt he couldn't quite hide. Catherine dressed in black Ralph Lauren suit, not the navy one she'd worn yesterday. Black felt more appropriate for what this meeting would be. Funeral clothes, makeup applied carefully, every flaw concealed, hair pulled back severely, armor constructed piece by piece. She stared at herself in the mirror, saw her father's eyes looking back. Same shape, same color, same fear, poorly hidden. "I won't be weak. I won't end like you." But her hands shook as she fastened her watch. Private car through snow-covered streets. Detroit moving slowly. Plows working overnight but losing ground to continuous snowfall. Catherine stared out the tinted windows, past the corner where Sterling Manufacturing used to stand. Now it was a storage facility, windowless concrete box holding other people's forgotten things. 36 years since her father died. 36 years of building Sterling to prove she wasn't him, and now it was all coming apart. Sterling Engine Works rose 40 floors into gray sky. Catherine's building, her name on the deed, her father's legacy rebuilt from ashes. She rode the elevator to the 40th floor at 7:55 a.m., walked past empty cubicles too early for most staff. Workshop where Daniel had fixed the Patriot yesterday. Conference room where she'd threatened him. Her office door ahead. Through the frosted glass, she saw 2 silhouettes waiting. Rebecca Harrison and Daniel Morrison. Catherine's hand trembled on the door handle. She forced it still, took a breath, opened the door. Catherine's office was exactly as she'd left it last night. Immaculate minimalist. Every surface chosen for intimidation rather than comfort. Rebecca Harrison sat in the chair across from Catherine's desk, briefcase open, tablet glowing, professional distance maintained. Daniel Morrison stood by the window holding a stack of black notebooks, looking out at Detroit, buried under snow. He turned when Catherine entered. Their eyes met. Yesterday she'd threatened his daughter. Today he held evidence that could destroy her. Catherine moved to her desk, sat in her chair, leather worn smooth by 15 years of command. Hands folded on the dark wood surface, spine straight, mask in place. "Dr. Harrison, Mr. Morrison, I assume this isn't a social call." Rebecca didn't waste time on pleasantries. "We're here to discuss your options, Catherine. You have 2 paths forward. I'd like to explain both before you choose." Rebecca activated her tablet, turned it so Catherine could see the screen. Financial statements, internal memos, project reports, all annotated with highlights and margin notes, tracing pattern of falsification across 4 years. You've been systematically misrepresenting Sterling's performance since 2021, hiding project failures, inflating revenue projections, booking future income as current, rushing safety certifications despite unresolved concerns. She swiped through document after document, each one damning, each one irrefutable. Total fraud exposure approximately $180 million across 14 major contracts. Catherine's face remained impassive, but Daniel saw her hands tighten, knuckles pressing white against the dark wood. Catherine stood abruptly, caged animal seeking exit that didn't exist. Those are internal documents. You had no authorization to access them. Rebecca's response was calm, factual. I'm Richard Maxwell's technical consultant. He authorized me to review anything necessary for due diligence. What I found was a company built on performance theater rather than engineering reality. The Patriot engine wasn't an isolated failure. It was a symptom of institutional dishonesty that starts with you. Catherine circled her desk, pacing energy looking for outlet. You don't understand. You've never run a company, never dealt with board members who demand impossible results or investors who threaten to pull funding at first sign of trouble. Her voice rising. I did what I had to do to survive. Daniel's voice cut through her desperation. Quiet, weighted, carrying truth. Catherine couldn't deflect. Your father survived his business partner's betrayal until he decided he couldn't. Catherine stopped pacing, turned to face him. You've been terrified of becoming him your entire adult life. Daniel stepped away from the window, moved closer. But Catherine, you already have. You're just dying slower. Catherine's mask shattered. Tears came suddenly, overwhelming defenses held for 36 years. She sank into her chair, hands covering face, shoulders shaking with sobs locked in a vault, finally breaking free. I don't know how to stop. Voice muffled by her hands, raw, broken. I started with one small adjustment to one report, then another. Then I couldn't stop because admitting I'd lied would mean losing everything. She looked up at the makeup, running eyes, red mask gone. The board would fire me. Investors would sue. My father's company would collapse like his did. I'd be him. Weak. Dead. Forgotten. Rebecca's voice softened. Lost prosecutorial edge became something closer to compassion, recognition of shared experience. Your father wasn't weak, Catherine. He was betrayed by people he trusted. That's not weakness. That's tragedy. She leaned forward. And you're not him. You built Sterling from nothing. That took courage and skill and determination. The fraud doesn't erase that. It just means you made choices out of fear instead of strength. Rebecca pulled 2 documents from her briefcase, set them side by side on Catherine's desk. Path 1. We give this evidence to federal prosecutors. You're indicted for securities fraud, wire fraud, obstruction. You spend the next 3 years fighting charges you'll probably lose. Sterling collapses during investigation. Your father's legacy dies along with your freedom. Path 2. You cooperate fully. Confess everything to the board this morning. Resign as CEO immediately. Provide testimony against any suppliers or contractors who participated in the fraud. In exchange, no criminal prosecution. You step down, assist the investigation. Sterling survives under new leadership. You lose your position, but you keep your freedom and you get a chance to rebuild who you are. Catherine picked up the cooperation agreement, hands shaking, paper trembling. Why would you offer this? After everything I've done, after I threatened Mr. Morrison's daughter last night. Daniel set James's notebooks on her desk. 12 volumes of ignored genius. Because my wife taught me that mistakes don't define people. How they respond to mistakes does. He met Catherine's eyes. You can spend the rest of your life running from your father's shadow, or you can face it and discover you're stronger than he was. Like yours. But that only works if you choose it. Catherine looked at the cooperation agreement. Read through clauses detailing confession, resignation, testimony. looked at her father's photograph on the credenza. William's smiling arm around teenage Catherine before partners betrayed him, before suicide note, before 16-year-old found him hanging in office. What would he want? Catherine picked up her pen. Hand standing, signed the cooperation agreement. Single signature ending one life, beginning another. She looked up at Rebecca and Daniel. What happens now? Rebecca checked her watch. Board meeting, 9 a.m. You tell them everything, then you step down. Catherine nodded, wiped her eyes, began reconstructing her mask, but this time there was something different underneath. Not armor. Acceptance. 7 board members sat around the glass table at 9 o'clock a.m. exactly. Collectively owned 43% of Sterling stock. Enough voting power to remove Catherine with consensus. Richard Maxwell occupied the head of the table investor's prerogative. His 3 aides flanked him. Tablets open. Recording everything, Dr. Rebecca Harrison sat at Maxwell's right. Interim CEO candidate. The plan already in motion. Daniel Morrison stood near the back wall. Observer, witness, the janitor who'd started this avalanche. Brandon Cooper and Emily Crawford represented the engineering staff. 28 other engineers waited outside their jobs, depending on how the next hour unfolded. Catherine entered at 9 exactly. She walked through the door like she was walking to execution. Black suit, hair pulled back, makeup repaired, but eyes still red from crying. She carried no briefcase, no tablet, no armor except truth. She stood at the head of the table, same position she'd commanded from for 15 years, but her posture was different now. Not defeated, more like someone who'd been carrying impossible weight and finally set it down. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for coming on short notice. Her voice steady despite the fear threatening to crack through. I called this emergency meeting to make an announcement. She paused. Let them lean forward. Effective immediately. I'm resigning as CEO of Sterling Engine Works. The board exploded in shocked murmurs. George Patterson's silver-haired 68, Catherine's primary enemy, stood halfway up, then sat down again. Richard Maxwell leaned forward, blue eyes fixed on Catherine with intensity of someone calculating cost of failure. Catherine raised her hand for silence, waited until whispers died. I'm resigning because I've been falsifying company reports for 4 years. Her voice carried to every corner of the silent room. Hiding project failures, inflating revenue projections, misrepresenting safety certifications, booking future income as current revenue. Total fraud exposure is approximately $180 million across 14 major contracts. The murmurs became shouts. Board members grabbed phones calling lawyers, calculating losses, protecting themselves. Brandon Cooper stared at his hands. He'd signed some of those reports, trusted Catherine's numbers. Emily Crawford pulled out her tablet, started pulling up project files. How much of the work she'd done was built on fraudulent foundations? George Patterson pointed at Catherine like she was war criminal, voice sharp with fury. You've destroyed this company. Destroyed shareholder value, our reputations. You should be in prison. Catherine didn't flinch, didn't defend, just waited for him to finish. Perhaps, Mr. Patterson, but prison doesn't help Sterling survive. Cooperation does, she gestured to Rebecca. Dr. Harrison has compiled complete documentation of the fraud. I'm cooperating fully with her investigation. I've agreed to testify against anyone, complicit suppliers, contractors, any board members who knew and didn't act. Her eyes scanned the table. Several members shifted uncomfortably. In exchange, federal prosecutors won't pursue criminal charges against me. Sterling can survive this if we act transparently and commit to fundamental change. Rebecca activated the conference room display, organizational charts, financial projections, plans for unwinding fraud and rebuilding Sterling around transparency. The engineering work at Sterling is fundamentally sound. The designs are good. The innovation is real. Problem was management, not capability. She pulled up corrected financial statements, real numbers. With proper leadership and honest reporting, this company can recover and thrive. We'll need 18 months of restructuring, full independent audit, revised contracts with clients. But Sterling's core technology, especially after yesterday's Patriot success, is valuable. Richard Maxwell stood. 6'2" of Texas oil money and hard-earned wisdom. Who would lead that recovery? His draw made the question sound simple, but it carried weight. Everyone here either knew about the fraud and did nothing or was incompetent enough not to notice. Either way, why should I trust any of you? Rebecca gestured toward Daniel. Because you already saw the solution yesterday, Richard. Daniel Morrison identified and fixed a problem your million-dollar team couldn't solve in 8 weeks. He did it with $78 and the willingness to listen. That's the kind of leadership Sterling needs. 7 board members stared at Daniel, the janitor, the maintenance worker, the man with no degree, no credentials, no business standing in this room. George Patterson objected immediately. With respect, Dr. Harrison, Mr. Morrison has no management experience, no engineering degree, no credentials beyond high school. How can he possibly run a technical organization? Rebecca's response was measured the same way he fixed your unfixable engine. By listening, by caring about truth more than ego, by having humility to learn rather than arrogance to assume he knows everything. Daniel stepped forward, felt weight of attention, 200 pounds of expectation pressing on shoulders that had carried nothing heavier than mop for 3 years, every eye tracking his movement. He pulled out his worn notebook, set it on the conference table. Dr. Harrison is correct that I lack credentials. I don't have an MBA. I never finished my engineering degree. I learned everything I know in my father's garage and in the shop I ran before medical bills forced me to sell it. He paused, met each board member's eyes in turn. But I learned something yesterday that credentials can't teach. Sterling doesn't need more people who know how to talk about engineering. It needs people who know how to do it. He opened the notebook, showed 2 weeks of observations. For 3 years, I've been watching this company. Watching projects fail because communication broke down between design and implementation. Watching talented people get ignored because they didn't have right degrees or titles. Watching executives prioritize appearance over function. He closed the notebook, set it down with finality. I can't promise I'll be perfect leader, but I promise I'll listen to people doing actual work and I'll fix what's broken instead of hiding it. Richard Maxwell walked around the table, stood directly in front of Daniel. Close enough. Daniel could smell coffee on his breath. Texas draw worn smooth, but still carrying Yano underneath Mr. Morrison. If I invest another $20 million to keep Sterling operational during restructuring. Can you deliver projects on time and on budget? Daniel met his gaze, didn't look away. I'll deliver more than that, Mr. Maxwell. I'll build a culture where talent is recognized regardless of background. Where problems get solved instead of buried. Where we measure success by what we actually accomplish, not what we claim we accomplished. Maxwell studied Daniel for a long moment, then nodded. I vote yes. Daniel Morrison becomes Chief Technical Officer. Dr. Harrison becomes Interim CEO for 12 months. We restructure Sterling around honesty instead of fraud. He looked around the table. Anyone who disagrees can sell me their shares at yesterday's closing price. Silence. Then one by one, hands raised, 6-1 in favor. George Patterson's sole dissent. His objection noted. Ignored. Just like that, Daniel Morrison transformed from janitor to executive, from invisible to undeniable, from someone the system discarded to someone the system needed to survive. Board members scattered like shrapnel after the vote, calling lawyers, calculating losses, protecting themselves. Some glanced at Catherine with fury, others with something like pity. Brandon Cooper approached Daniel hesitantly. Mr. Morrison, sir, I was wrong about you. I'd like to stay. Learn how you do what you do. Daniel extended his hand. Call me Daniel. And yes, I'll need engineers who can admit mistakes. That's where real learning starts. Emily Crawford stood behind Brandon. Does that include junior engineers who should have caught the conversion error 8 weeks ago? Daniel smiled. Especially those. You found it yesterday. That's what matters. Catherine approached Daniel alone. Board members avoided her now toxic asset legal liability. Former queen without kingdom extended her hand formally. Thank you for not destroying me when you had every reason to. Daniel shook her hand, felt the tremor she couldn't suppress. Thank you for being brave enough to tell the truth. That's harder than lying, especially when you've been lying to protect yourself for so long. What will you do now? Daniel looked around the conference room. His conference room now somehow tried to be the leader my father taught me to be. Someone who listens, who fixes what's broken. Small smile crossed Catherine's face. First genuine one in years. And what will I do? She looked out the window at Detroit buried under snow. Learn to be someone I'm not ashamed to see in the mirror. Maybe that's enough. Catherine walked out of the conference room, out of Sterling Engine Works for the last time as CEO, carrying nothing except knowledge. She'd finally made a choice her father would have been proud of if he'd lived long enough to make it himself. Daniel watched her disappear down the corridor. Woman who tried to destroy him yesterday chose redemption today. Sometimes the bravest thing was admitting you were wrong. 2 weeks later, December 2nd, 2025. 8:30 a.m. Daniel's office occupied the 35th floor, not the penthouse. He'd refused that. Corner space felt right, close to the workshop, close to the engineering staff, high enough to see Detroit but not so high he forgot where he came from. Window overlooking the city. Desk with laptop and engineering references. James's red toolbox sat on credenza beside family photos. Elizabeth at their wedding. Sophie in her nursing scrubs. James in the Ford plant. Nameplate on the door. Daniel Morrison, Chief Technical Officer. Every time he saw it, part of him expected to wake up in his studio apartment mopping floors. Daniel had instituted listening sessions every Friday afternoon. Any employee janitor to senior engineer could present ideas. No credentials required, only competence. Result 3, previously ignored suggestions already implemented, including one from a maintenance worker named Adrian, who'd noticed the HVAC system wasting energy by running full blast in empty sections. Simple fix saved Sterling $4,000 monthly. Adrian got a bonus and promotion to facilities management. Rebecca Harrison, now interim CEO, had overhauled all project timelines. Real deadlines, not aspirational ones. Real budgets, not fantasy projections. Board initially resisted, wanted optimistic numbers for investor presentations. Richard Maxwell shut that down. I'd rather know truth and plan around it than be surprised by lies later. The Patriot now ran 24/7 hours without shutdown. First production units shipping to Navy contractors next week. Marine industry publications running features. Sterling Engine Works comeback and the janitor who saved a company. Daniel hated the headlines, but the work spoke for itself. Brandon Cooper demoted to senior engineer, not lead. He'd taken it without resigning. Knew he'd failed. Wanted to rebuild. Emily Crawford promoted to lead engineer. 25 years old, youngest person in that role in Sterling's history. Daniel's reasoning, she has humility. Brandon lacked. And humility matters more than years of experience. George Patterson, still on board but marginalized, voted against every proposal. But 6 votes beat 1 every time. Daniel still arrived at 7:00 a.m., old habit from maintenance days. No longer cleaning, but sometimes picked up mop to help facilities crew. Didn't want to forget. He'd moved to a 2-bedroom apartment in Dearborn, $1,400 a month. Not luxury, but had kitchen with 4 working burners and shower with good water pressure. Small victories. Sophie had driven from Pittsburgh that evening, surprised Daniel by showing up at Sterling at 5:00 p.m., watching him work through the glass partition, seeing her father command respect from engineers who'd dismissed him 2 weeks ago. Now they sat at Daniel's new dining table. Actual table, not card table. 4 chairs, not 2. Eating spaghetti with meat sauce from Elizabeth's recipe. This apartment is so much better, Dad. Daniel smiled. 2 bedrooms means you can visit without sleeping on the couch. I wasn't complaining about the couch. I was worried about you in that studio. It felt like you were disappearing. I was. For 3 years, I was disappearing. Then something happened that forced me to be visible again. He told her. Everything. Catherine's threat, Rebecca's intervention, James's notebooks, the mercy lie about his father's death, the board meeting, the choice between invisibility and impact. Sophie listened without interrupting. When he finished, she reached across the table and took his hand. Grandpa would be so proud. Daniel's eyes welled. I hope so. I got the pediatric rotation I wanted. Starts January at Children's Hospital. Full-time position after graduation if I do well. Daniel squeezed her hand. Your mother would be so proud. They sat quietly for a moment. Elizabeth's absence still present at the table. Always would be, but not crushing anymore. Just there. Part of who they were. After dinner, Sophie pulled a small wrapped box from her bag. Found this at an estate sale in Pittsburgh. Thought you'd want it? Daniel unwrapped carefully. Inside vintage Ford Motor Company lapel pin, same kind James had worn every day. Daniel's hands trembled slightly as he pinned it to his flannel shirt over his heart. Thank you, sweetheart. Couch watching snow fall outside the window. Detroit at night beautiful despite its scars. Or maybe because of them. Daniel's phone buzzed. Text from Rebecca board approved your budget for new hires. You're building something real, Daniel. He showed Sophie the text. She squeezed his hand. Grandpa would be proud. Mom, too. Daniel looked at the Ford pin on his chest. Felt its weight. Legacy and responsibility and hope all compressed into small piece of metal. Yeah, I think they would be. Same evening, 7:30 p.m. Catherine's apartment occupied a building in Dearborn, same neighborhood as Daniel's old studio. No penthouse, 1-bedroom space. $950 a month. Furnished simply from IKEA. No designer, no champagne with shopping. Couch bed table chairs. Functional. Honest. But it was hers. Earned through honesty. After her resignation, Catherine spent 2 weeks testifying. Cooperation agreement meant detailed statements to prosecutors, helped identify fraud participants. 4 suppliers indicted 2 board members under investigation. Her testimony crucial. Without it, case would have been weaker. Now she taught business ethics at Wayne State University. Adjunct professor, $45,000 a year. Irony not lost on her woman who committed fraud, teaching how not to. But students respected her because she was honest about failures. I'm not here to tell you how to succeed. I'm here to show you how not to fail the way I did. Weekly sessions with Dr. Jennifer Walsh, trauma specialist. Finally addressing PTSD from father's suicide. 36 years of carrying that image. William hanging in his office. 16-year-old Catherine finding him, trying to cut him down. Too late. Learning now that she didn't have to carry it alone anymore. Catherine sat at her small kitchen table that evening, laptop open, grading student papers on business ethics. One paper made her pause. Topic: When does self-preservation become self-destruction? Student's thesis. Sometimes the bravest thing a leader can do is admit they were wrong and step down. Not because they're weak, but because they're strong enough to face truth. Catherine wrote in margin. Yes, exactly. This is the lesson I learned. Too late, but not too late to pass on. A plus work. Her phone rang. Rebecca Harrison, how are you doing? Catherine smiled, genuine expression that felt foreign on her face. Better smaller life, but it's mine. How's Sterling thriving? Daniel's doing remarkable work. You'd be proud. Catherine looked out her window at Detroit. Same city, different perspective. I am proud. Tell him thank you for giving me the chance my father never had. December 10th, 2025, 8:15 p.m. Daniel was alone in the workshop building, mostly empty skeleton crew on night shift security. making rounds every hour. He'd told Rebecca he was working late on Patriot improvements. Partly true. Mostly he needed to be here. The Patriot PM4000 sat on its test stand, not running, just present. 7 feet of American engineering that had changed his life. Daniel approached it slowly, placed both hands on the block. Metal cool to touch, inert, waiting. He closed his eyes, listened. Not to mechanical systems this time, to memory. An engine has a heart, son. You listen with your ears, your mind, and your soul. Summer afternoon, 1983. Daniel, 13 years old. Learning to diagnose Plymouth's troubles by feeling rather than measuring. The engine speaks truth. Machines don't lie. Sometimes people lie about what machines tell them, but the machine itself, always honest. Daniel had carried that teaching for 42 years through James's death, through building Morrison's auto repair, through Elizabeth's illness, through bankruptcy, through 3 years of invisibility until 2 weeks ago when that teaching saved Sterling Engine Works, saved Catherine Sterling, saved himself. He'd brought James's notebooks with him tonight. 12 volumes spread across the workbench, each one documenting solutions Ford ignored. Daniel had given them to Rebecca last week. Digitize these, put them in Sterling's engineering library, make sure his name is on every page. Rebecca had agreed immediately. By January, James Morrison's innovations would be required reading for every Sterling engineer. The ghost who Ford dismissed would finally get recognition. Daniel pulled out his worn notebook, the one he'd kept for 3 years. Observations, calculations. 2 weeks of watching the Patriot fail, opened to a fresh page, wrote in the same cramped handwriting his father had used December 10, 2025. Patriot PM4000 hour 572, running perfectly. Temperature optimal, pressure stable. No errors. Then added, Dad, I kept my promise. I listened, I fixed what was broken, and I made you proud. He set down the pencil, placed both hands on the engine one last time, felt the cold metal, imagined James's hands beside his. 3 generations of Morrisons who'd learned to speak the language engines taught. Security camera in corner recorded it all. Daniel silhouetted against workshop window. Detroit skyline behind him. Lights glowing in darkness. City that died and refused to stay buried. Man who did the same. Engine singing song only he could hear. Rebecca found him 20 minutes later, brought him coffee, sat beside him in comfortable silence. 2 people who'd been broken, been saved by James Morrison's kindness, now passing that forward. Sophie called the next morning, told him she got the permanent position at Children's Hospital. Elizabeth's dream for her daughter fulfilled. Catherine texted next week. Simple message. Thank you. Nothing more needed. But tonight, Daniel sat with his father's ghost and his father's engine and his father's notebooks. And for the first time in 3 years, he wasn't invisible. He wasn't alone. He was exactly where he belonged. Daniel closed the notebook, pressed his palm to the engine one last time, whispered into the empty workshop. I'm home, Dad. I finally found my way back. Outside the window, snow began to fall again. Detroit preparing for another winter, another cycle of death and resurrection. But Daniel Morrison, 55 years old, chief technical officer, keeper of his father's legacy, wasn't afraid of winter anymore. He'd learned that engines had hearts, and hearts could be healed.